His children hadn't spoken a single word in 6 weeks, and Harlan Pike stood in his own kitchen doorway watching the newest housekeeper try anyway, half convinced she would fail exactly as the last two had. "Good morning," the woman said to the twins seated stiff and silent at the table, her voice light as though she were speaking to children who might answer her. "I'm Ruth Calloway. I understand you're not much for talking these days. That's all right. I've had seasons like that myself." Neither Daniel nor his sister May so much as lifted their eyes from their oatmeal. Harlan had warned the agency in Ironwood twice now. A boy of 7 and a girl the same, twins born within an hour of each other, gone silent as the grave since they'd buried their mother in the spring. First housekeeper had lasted 11 days before she declared the children unnatural and quit. The second had lasted 4, weeping into her apron more than the twins ever had. Harlan did not expect Ruth Calloway, a quiet widow with tired eyes and a black mourning band still stitched to her sleeve, to last the week. "I'll not have you frightening them with pity," he said, once she'd stepped out onto the porch where the children couldn't hear. "They've had enough of that from every soul in the county." "I've no pity to spare, Mr. Pike," Ruth said. "I buried my own husband 8 months past, and my little girl the winter before that, from the fever. I know exactly what it costs a person to stop talking. I don't intend to pity your children. I intend to wait them out." Something in the flat, unflinching way she said it, no tremor, no reaching for sympathy, made Harlan look at her properly for the first time. He saw then what grief had carved into her, the same hollow-eyed steadiness he caught in his own shaving mirror some mornings, and he nodded once gruffly and left her to it. His wife, Sarah, died in April, thrown from a spooked mare on the ranch road not a quarter-mile from the house, gone before the doctor from Ironwood could even be sent for. The twins had been in the yard when it happened, had seen the whole of it from the porch steps, and had not spoken a true sentence since. The doctor called it shock, said it might pass with time, said some children simply needed longer than others to find their voices again. Harlan had begun, in the small hours when he could not sleep, to fear it might never pass at all, that he had lost not only his wife that April morning, but the sound of his children's voices along with her. He had almost given up on hired help entirely by the time the agency wired about Ruth Calloway. He'd nearly sent word back declining her, certain a third failure would do more harm than good. It was only desperation and the growing tangle of unwashed linens and untended garden that made him send the wagon for her after all. She did not try to make the twins speak. That was the thing that surprised him most, watching from a distance over the following days. She set their plates without demanding a thank you, brushed May's hair without asking her to hum along, walked Daniel out to the barn chores without filling the silence with false cheer. She simply stayed steady as fence posts and let the quiet be quiet. It was May who broke first, in her own way. Ruth had taken to singing while she worked, not to the children, never directly at them, only humming over the wash tub or the bread dove like a woman keeping herself company. One afternoon Harlan came in from the west pasture to find, standing close beside Ruth at the stove, not speaking, but swaying faintly in time with the tune, her small hand resting on the hem of Ruth's apron like an anchor line. He did not say anything. He only stood in the doorway a long moment, throat tight, and went back out before either of them noticed him there. By the second week Daniel had taken to following Ruth on her chores the way a shadow follows a lamp, close but silent, watching her hands more than her face. She let him carry the egg basket, let him choose which hen to shoo off the nest, and though he never once spoke to her, he began leaving small offerings on the porch step each morning, a smooth creek stone, a blue jay feather, a fistful of clover. The way a child leaves gifts for someone he has decided, without saying so, to trust. "They're talking to you," Harlan said one evening, watching Ruth set the day's tribute of stones in a row along the windowsill. "In their own way, more than they've said to me in 6 weeks. They're not ready to trust their voices yet," Ruth said, "but they're ready to trust something. That's no small thing, Mr. Pike, after what they've lost." "Harlan," he said, "you've been under my roof 3 weeks now. You may as well use my name." It was the first time he'd offered it, and the small warmth of it sat between them longer than either had intended. Old Doc Weaver rode out from Ironwood that same week to check on the twins, as he did every month since the accident, and found Harlan waiting for him on the porch with more hope in his face than the doctor had seen there in half a year. "They're not speaking yet," Harlan admitted, "but they're different, Doc. May hums along when Ruth sings. Daniel's taken to leaving her gifts on the step like she's someone worth courting favor with. I don't know what to make of it. Make of it what it is, Weaver said, packing his bag back onto his horse. Trust Harlan. That's the whole of what grief steals from a child, the certainty that people stay. Whatever that woman's doing, she's teaching them people can stay after all. Don't you dare let her go. Harlan turned the words over long after the doctor had ridden off down the lane and found he had no intention of doing anything of the sort. He found himself watching her more than he meant to after that, the patient way she managed a household that had nearly broken 2 women before her, the way grief had not hardened her, but only worn her down to something gentler and more certain. She never spoke of her husband or her daughter except in the plainest terms, no self-pity in it, only fact, the way a person speaks of whether that has already passed. He recognized that particular endurance because he carried a rougher version of it himself, and some nights, sitting across from her at the kitchen table after the children were abed, he caught himself wishing the evening would not end so soon. "You're good for them," he told her, the week the twins began sitting closer to her at meals, close enough their shoulders touched hers. "Better than I've managed to be, if I'm honest. I don't know how to reach them anymore. I look at them and see her, and some days that's more than I can carry." "They don't need you to carry anything," Ruth said gently. "They need you to sit down beside them and let the grief be there in the room without running from it. That's all I've done, Harlan. I haven't done anything you couldn't." He wasn't certain that was true, but he was grateful for the kindness of the lie. The storm came up fast on a Thursday in late October, the kind of black-bellied prairie storm that turned the sky the color of a bruise inside 20 minutes, and it was Ruth who noticed first that the twins were nowhere in the yard. "Harlan," she called, running from the hen house with her skirts caught in one fist. "The children. I sent them to gather kindling an hour past, and they've not come back, and I can't find them in the barn or the smokehouse either." They found the trail of a small overturned kindling basket at the edge of the west pasture, scattered wood already darkening under the first fat drops of rain, and beyond it 2 sets of small footprints heading toward the ravine where Harlan's cattle sometimes wandered and where the creek, swollen with the week's earlier rains, ran high and fast over slick stone. "They know not to go near that water," Harlan said, already running, his voice raw with a fear he hadn't let himself feel in months. Not since the April morning he'd found Sarah in the road and known, before he'd even reached her, that he was already too late. The rain came harder now, sheeting sideways across the pasture, and the thunder rolled close enough to shake the ground beneath their boots. Harlan's mind filled, unbidden, with every terrible possibility the ravine could offer a pair of 7-year-olds in a rising creek, and he ran faster than he had ever run in his life, Ruth's skirts a blur of grey beside him, both of them shouting the children's names into a wind that flung the sound right back at them. They found Daniel first, soaked through and shaking on the near bank, pointing wordlessly. The only sound he made was a thin, cracked cry toward the water below, where May had gone in after a barn cat that had bolted onto a half-submerged log and now clung there herself, the current tugging at her skirts, the log beginning to shift beneath her weight. Harlan lunged for the bank, but the rain-slick mud gave beneath his boots, and he went down hard, losing precious seconds scrambling up again, and it was Ruth who reached the water first, wading in without a moment's hesitation, the cold current dragging at her skirts as she fought her way to the log. "May, look at me," she called over the roar of the rising water. "Look at me, sweetheart. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere without you." The log groaned and shifted, and for one terrible heartbeat Ruth thought she would reach the girl in time. Then her hand closed on May's wrist, and she hauled her free just as the log broke loose entirely and spun away downstream, and the 2 of them went under together in the shock of it before Ruth found her footing again and dragged them both, coughing and gasping, toward the bank where Harlan had finally reached them, his hands shaking as he pulled them both up out of the water. It was May, wrapped in her father's coat and shuddering against Ruth's shoulder, who spoke first in 6 long weeks. "You came," she said, in a voice gone rusty with disuse, so soft it was nearly lost beneath the rain. "I knew you'd come." Ruth held her close and wept, openly, without shame, and beside her Daniel finally broke his own silence too, sobbing into his father's shoulder the tears he had been holding since the spring, and Harlan gathered all three of them against him there on the muddy bank. Unable to tell whose heartbeat was whose, only certain that something broken in his house had finally, mercifully, come undone. They walked back to the ranch house together through the last of the storm, the twins talking now in halting, overlapping bursts, as though those 6 weeks of silence had built up behind a dam that had finally given way, and Harlan watched Ruth listen to every word of it with a tenderness that undid him more than the flood had. "I told you I only intended to wait them out," Ruth said later, once the children were dry and fed and finally, exhaustedly asleep, her own hair still damp, a blanket around her shoulders that Harlan had draped there, without either of them remarking on it. "You did more than wait," Harlan said. "You walked into that creek without a moment's thought for your own safety. I thought I might lose you along with them. I couldn't lose another child, Harlan, not while I had the strength to stop it." Her voice caught, and she looked down at her hands. "I know I was only hired to keep your house. But I've come to love those two as if they were my own, and I find I've come to feel a good deal more than housekeepers' fondness for their father besides." Harlan crossed the small distance between them and took her hand, the same steady hand that had hauled his daughter from the water, and did not let go of it. "Then stay," he said simply, "not as hired help, as my wife if you'll have me, and a mother to those two for the rest of your days and mine." Ruth Calloway, who had buried a husband and a daughter, and had long since stopped hoping for a house full of voices again, looked toward the room where the twins slept curled together like they had in the womb, and then at the weathered, hopeful face of the man before her, and found she had an answer ready after all. "Yes," she said, and the word came out steady sure, the first true yes she had spoken since her own house had gone silent. "Yes, Harlan, I'll stay." Outside, the storm broke apart into a clean autumn evening, and in the room down the hall, for the first time in 6 long weeks, the sound of children's laughter drifted soft and unafraid through the Pike Ranch house, filling every corner of it that grief had left empty. They married before the first snow, in a small ceremony at the Ironwood Chapel, with Daniel and May standing solemn and proud on either side of them, each of them chattering the whole ride home about who would ride beside whom, and whether the barn cat May had gone into the creek for might be permitted, at long last, to sleep indoors. Doc Weaver came to the wedding supper and told anyone who'd listen that he'd never in 30 years of practice seen a house heal so completely nor so fast, once the right person finally walked through its door. Ruth kept the row of smooth creek stones on the windowsill long after the twins had outgrown leaving them, a small quiet monument to the season when 2 silent children had chosen, one gift at a time, to trust her with their voices again. And on quiet evenings, when the ranch house was full of chatter and firelight and the particular noise of a family that grief could no longer touch, Harlan would sometimes catch his wife's eye across the room and think, with a gratitude he never quite got used to, that he had gone looking for a housekeeper and found, instead, the very thing that made his house a home again.